In this lesson, we're going to now look at value. And as mentioned previously, value is very, very, very important. It really is the foundations and the fundamentals to coloring and painting well. And if you grasp this lesson really well, you're on a solid footing moving forward. All right, so first off, we're going to take a look at the value scale, right? Now, in art, we obviously only have a sort of range of white being the brightest we could represent in an image, and black being the darkest we can represent. If you look at the color picker on the right side of the screen here, when we're talking about value, we're really just talking about brightness and darkness. And in art, we represent this brightness and darkness in kind of 10 steps. Let's start with the brightest being white, which I will just use a very light gray to represent that on the screen. You can barely see it, but it's there. And our next step would be a little bit further along. Step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, 7, 8, 9, and let's grab these guys and just make them a little bit smaller so we can get 10 in there. And 10 would be black, right? And this is what we call our value scale, okay? And the reason we do this is, in reality, you know, what is the brightest you get? Who knows? Probably some star in the galaxy, right? It's extremely bright. What is the darkest you get? Is there blacker than black? Is there, you know, what does a completely lightless area look like? You know, unless you're in there, I assume it's hard to tell, but it's probably, you know, for us, pitch black, all right? But in art, in order to talk about value properly, and in a more efficient way, we break down the brightest we can go and the darkest we can go into these 10 value steps, or these 10 value stops, right? And it depends who you're learning from, whether they go 1 to 10, where 1 is the brightest, 10 is the darkest, or vice versa. It doesn't really make a difference, but just knowing that we talk about these 10 steps, these 10 value stops, right? And so this is how we will say that you want to make sure that when you're painting XYZ object or coloring XYZ object, that there is a big enough stop between two values, right? Two brightness levels, so that the viewer can see what is in light and what is in shadow. Now we're going to go more into that. We're just taking a brief overview now of value. We're going to go more into something called the two value statement a little bit later on. But for now, we want to understand value in art is really brightness or darkness. It's got nothing to do with color, right? It's just brightness or darkness. Now, of course, if we go back to the color picker here on the right, we can see that color can be bright or dark. So we can have a bright red or a dark red, but that's got to do with the value of the color, right? And value forms the foundation of all of this. Okay, so that's the first big thing, the value scale. Learn the value scale off by heart. Get used to the idea of the value scale so that you know a 1 or a 10 is bright white, you know, or a 1 or a 10 is black, depending on which way the scale is moving. And that 5 is generally what we call a 50% gray or a neutral gray. And that if we go from 5 to, and we paint with 5 and 3, or we color with 5 and 3, that is one stop away from the other values, right? Because there's a stop away. So we say, oh, you separate something by one stop. Well, we'd separate 5 and 3 by the stop of 4. 2 stops, we'd separate 5 and 2 by the 2 stops of 3 and 4. Now, let me not make you feel like it's super complex. It really isn't. We've really just got 10 values in a scale, brightest to darkness. And that is how we talk about it when we say, okay, you want to keep the value more neutral or middle, you want a brighter value, or you want a darker value. Okay, so that is the value scale. But there's some important stuff we want to talk about with values as well. And it's so obvious, but no one really states it. And so I decided, you know what, I have to state this so that you guys are pro right in the beginning. Here we have a value-only version. If you want to call it a grayscale or a black and white version, although it's technically not black and white because there's many value ranges in here. But nevertheless, we have a grayscale version here of a piece of artwork that I've done previously. And the important thing I want you to realize is that different objects have a different inherent values, just like different objects have different colors. So, you know, if someone said to you, well, a leaf is green and the bark of a tree is brown, you'd be like, duh, that's obvious. But what is not so obvious is that different values different objects, right, have different values. That's not to say that some objects don't have the same values, but this is such a crucial point, and I've never seen it taught ever in anything. Different objects have different values. And so what I mean by that in your character work, I'm going to use red on the illustration here, is her hair's value differs from her skin's value, right? The eyeball's value differs from the skin's value. The earring's value differs from, you know, the skin's value. The lip's value slightly differs from the skin. You know, the value of the earring differs from the hair, and so on and so forth. And obviously on the skin has its lit value areas and then its shadowed value areas. All right, and same thing with the hair. It's lit, its shadowed areas and its lit areas. And of course, you will have some values that can be shared in a value sense. For example, the highlights here on the hair seemingly are quite close to the skin value. All right, but keep this in mind. Different objects have different values, just like different objects have different colors. And later on, we'll go through a value check layer, just a simple tool you can use in Photoshop to check the value of your work and see, oh, I see I've made my hair value and my skin value the same. Let me change it up. Because here's the key thing as well. If we make two values similar, to the viewer, the object is the same object, even if you've made the colors different. Now, this may seem crazy because you're like, that doesn't make sense. Like, the color is different, but you're saying the value can be the same. And it is true. The color can be different, yet the value can be the same. You could have a blue and a red that are at the same value. And so while the viewer will perceive the difference in color, their brain will not perceive the difference in value. And so they'll lose one key thing, which is why we learn value in the first place. They will lose the ability to distinguish in 3 dimensions the difference between those objects, as well as the planes and the shadows and so on, if the values are the same. So value is pivotal and value is fundamentally important. All right, so that is it for value for now. We are going to go through some more advanced topics on value, but learn the value scale off by heart, get used to this idea that different objects have different values, and start asking yourself as you look around, what is the value of this? What is the value of that? You know, what is the value of this light that I have on in the room in contrast to the value of maybe my computer monitor or my pencils or what have you? Start looking for value, because as we grow in our artistic ability, we learn to see better, and learning to see value is fundamental to being able to paint well, right, and color well. Awesome. I'll see you in the next lesson.